Hello, and welcome back to the Python Web Conference 2021 Cloud Track. As you can tell, I'm not Josh Qualls, but I'm stepping in for him for this particular track, for this particular talk by Renaldi Gondosubroto. Renaldi is calling to us from Melbourne, where it is almost 3 a.m., and that's dedication for you, for him to join us and give us his presentation on understanding best practices in building and deploying Pyramid cloud applications.
Thanks for your introduction, Kim. So, hey everyone, I hope that everyone's having a great time at the conference so far. So let me just start up my share screen for us to get started. So I'm Renaldi, as introduced by Kim, and today I'm going to be talking about understanding best practice in building and deploying cloud applications. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So a bit about myself before we get started. So I'm a 12 times AWS, 3 times Azure certified, and 3 times Google Cloud certified in terms of my cloud technology background. My personal field of interest is within penetration testing and accessibility practices. And of course, anything to deal with the cloud, really. So as you can see, this talk definitely falls within those fields of interests. And of course, on the side, I run some meetups. I run a couple of meetups in Melbourne based on new technology. And I run hackathons as well on the side. And as you know from my currently being here as well, I do tech talks. For the past 4 to 5 years now, I've been doing tech talks. Really love delivering content to the community, especially to be able to really give back to community knowledge that I got over the past years, and really all about different topics, really, such as this one, for example, with Pyramid, but I deal a lot with different backgrounds as well within Python as well, such as within like the crypto block and many other stuff like that. And also I'm a VR techno enthusiast as well. And if you want to stay in touch with me after the conference and ask a few questions as well directly to me, I'm also happy to answer them over Twitter or over LinkedIn as well. And I've provided the socials over below my profile picture. So let's get started. Now, the nature of Pyramid. Now, I'm sure that not everyone here are familiar with Pyramid. It may be quite an interesting topic for some as well. And I personally do believe that the topic of Pyramid, compared to many platforms such as, let's say, Django or Zope or Web2Py, is quite underrated. And that's particularly what inspired me to actually give this talk as well. To really, to both talk about best practices, but also familiarize people with the concept of Pyramid as well, and why it should be considered as a particular framework to be able to really be used in the community and for your particular applications. So Pyramid itself, for those who are not too familiar with it, is essentially a Python web-based application and essentially a framework. And essentially it's an open source framework, and essentially at a bottom line, it's designed to make creating web applications easier. So we have many different things that are already provided by Pyramid, and including being able to organize for views, being able to organize for traversal, and being able to direct URLs correctly. And it essentially offers a lot of features. And I'll talk about these features in this particular talk and how we can adapt that to be able to accommodate us deploying it eventually on the cloud, and why I believe that it is still underrated and that there is still a lot of potential for Pyramid in general. So here's the agenda that we'll be going through. First off, we'll be talking about the main perks of Pyramid. After that, we'll be talking a bit about scaffolding, essentially also about how you plan your layout for Pyramid, or a Pyramid application, how you can plan also in general before actually using Pyramid to actually use it, to actually get a picture about how you'll be able to go around utilizing it. creating an architecture. Particularly, I'll present conceptual architecture in terms of AWS for this particular case study. Configurations, what you need to consider while you configure typical parameters for a pyramid application, and what we got out of it. So the main perks of pyramid. So these are the main reasons, essentially, why I believe pyramid is a really good resource. And you may think, oh, but usually other platforms such as say Django or Web2Py may have these as well. And we'll dive into the more unique stuff of pyramid later as well. So, but the baseline stuff, we have a flexible platform really with pyramid. And this is essentially, it's easy to scale where necessary. And that is one thing that we want for being able to deploy in the cloud. We want that scalability as a great thing of ours, because everything at a cloud, everything we deploy at a cloud at this particular point in time is always changing. And we always need a flexible platform that we can always change when necessary. It's able to use multiple languages for templates, which is definitely a plus. It's not critically constrained to one. And also we have extensibility. So we can always build on it. And essentially, the nature of pyramid itself is based on extensibility. So we can definitely add on more stuff onto our current baseline and be able to build the foundation first, but eventually we're able to also build more onto it. And essentially, I'm going to talk just a bit about a few things as well about ZOP and Pylons. So essentially, I'm sure that some people here are also already very used to ZOP and Pylons as well. So as you may already know as well, ZOP is all about also extensibility, traversal, declarative security, and Pylons is also all about the URL dispatch, non-opinionated view of persistence, templating, and really a lot more. But the beauty of pyramid is really that it combines all of this. You really are able to get both traversal and URL dispatch, and also in general the whole concept of declarative programming as well, because you're able to essentially declare these kinds of declarative variables you need to be essentially, and also provide security around that. So I'll be talking about how we utilize declarative programming as well over the next few slides as well. But essentially, the real good thing about pyramid essentially that we are able to essentially utilize these kinds of services essentially in one package. So pyramid scaffolds are able to also allow us to make better decisions. And this is because that they already provide us with very stringent documentation. They're able to help us visualize things easier. And essentially, they're able to also provide extensions that are able to help us make better decisions. So it's not only complete like one-stop platform framework. It provides like also extensions that we can build upon, libraries, and if you explore the pyramid community, essentially we'll be able to get a lot from this as well on how we're able to really utilize different libraries that pyramid already has to its fullest. So what is scaffolding? So essentially we'll be able to use through scaffolding the particular we'll be able to source the files and directories on disk, and essentially we'll be able to use it'll be useful for being able to apply the layer for applications. And this is just an example proper scaffold layout that is used as a particular design. So, and this is a particular example. This is just showing that how it's essentially done. So we could have basically a main folder, and and essentially typical stuff to include within a pyramid layout is usually having a manifest file, of course, and dev file, for example, if you need one, and of course after that, just the typical stuff such as a .py file, and of course, just some custom stuff as well, such as views. And views is particularly one topic that I'll be talking about later as well. And of course, testing as well. So this is just an example of how we might want to plan out the layout before we actually create the whole thing itself. Essentially, we plan around the scaffold as well. And essentially, we create stuff around the scaffold as well in order for us to be able to utilize and make that platform, our app as planned as necessary. And essentially, you'll also want to be able to choose your toolkit when you plan these kinds of things. So MongoDB, of course, is one particular example that I'm sure is not a stranger to anyone. So this is an example. Of course, I'm going to talk mainly about AWS later. So I'm going to talk about the AWS context, but I just want to mention MongoDB because I've seen a lot of applications been using it as well, and it's always a popular choice. So essentially, always important with MongoDB, ORMs, and really a lot. And it really depends on what you're familiar with. It depends on what you're working with. But if you're working in a cloud, you may prefer to use, say, AWS's services such as RDS or Redshift and many more. Particularly the architecture I'll be talking about later will be utilizing RDS. So, or you could also, for example, use on the Google platform or the Google Cloud platform or Azure. It really doesn't matter. It really helps out in a lot of that. And of course, it also depends on data you're working with particularly. And deciding on a database, it will depend on that. So 3 factors of building with Pyramid are data, your experience, and extensibility. So first off, data. As I mentioned before, one of the biggest things to consider is really what particular data are you using with your platform, because it'll affect the choice of database that you will use, because each database has its own pros and cons, of course, right? So you'll definitely need a database that is able to accommodate that. And of course, your experience. It depends on both your experience level and what you're familiar with as well. So essentially, you also have to work around it as well at some times, because some cloud platforms may require a bit more knowledge than others, and some may require a bit more no-tos than all. So it definitely depends on that as well. And of course, extensibility. Always plan for extensibility when building for Pyramid cloud applications. And now we get to essentially the beating heart of the whole thing, the architecture. So in this particular example, I'll be highlighting a bit about a particular example of how we can choose to provision particular services in order to provision a cloud application. So when we provision a cloud application, we always have to first talk about the data that we currently have, right? So in this particular case example, we could be looking at just typical, say, spreadsheet data collected over the time, really about collecting, say, points in time, collecting points of information in time that may contain stuff such as the geographical location of where it is, the point of time where we were taking, and say other parameters just like seconds or something like that. So when we talk about stuff like that, it would make sense that we would introduce RDS as a database. And if you're familiar with RDS, then you'd know that it really is a great resource for data such as that. And essentially, in this particular case scenario, we also show particular builds of how we choose to be able to organize the flow of information and organize the overall flow from our computer. So in a particular case example, we're using S3 as well to be able to store points of data in time. We're not going to use EC2 due to particularly the fact that data is not safe for a long while, and that it can eventually disappear as well due to the constraints of the machine being able to transfer to someone else. So we're going to talk about a bit about that later as well. But essentially, that's why we're not bringing EC2 in this particular instance. People have asked me as well about EC2 previously in regard to pyramid, and I do believe that it's definitely possible, but I just don't particularly use it for. I wouldn't use it for sensitive data that could disappear over time. So, especially on workloads such as if we plan to establish on workloads based on pyramid that will continue on for long periods of time. So essentially, in this particular case example, we're using CloudFront for distributing the flow of information over a wide range of networks, and which should also distribute to S3 as well. Particularly, this could be an S3 dedicated for a user, for example, if they need the particular stars for themselves. And of course, an API gateway in order to, well, since we're connecting different devices, we would want to utilize different APIs, and we definitely want to be able to utilize that. And of course, have that flow of transfer deployed from to Lambda as well to run the necessary codes. And essentially, this particular architecture can either be done manually or can also be done through Beanstalk as well, which is what I recommend for a lot of people also starting out with AWS as well, to essentially when you already have your pyramid application ready, sometimes it's definitely easier to be able to let Beanstalk take care of everything for you. So essentially, being able to just directly put on your parameters needed, your what instances you think require, and also what are the constraints require, and really letting Beanstalk take care of it all. So it really is two different sides of the same coin, really. So it really depends on your particular method of preference, but either way can work. And essentially, such an architecture as this can be done that way as well. And this kind of architecture also provides for the ease of flow of data, as we can see, since we are able to also use RDS, which, if you're already familiar with it, is very good with flexible data and data that continuously updates. So two things that I want to mention in particular as services that are crucial to Pyramid are URL dispatch and traversal. And essentially, URL dispatch is essentially a route-based mechanism for table-based data, which I believe that a lot of people will find very useful in their building of applications. So it essentially provides essentially a simple way to be able to map URLs through a simple pattern matching language. And essentially, we'll be able to have an ordered set of patterns to be checked one by one. And if one of patterns is able to be matched, a particular view callable will be eventually invoked. And also we have traversal, which is to be able to create tree of resources, which are able to be addressed by the URLs. Essentially, we're able to find a particular resource that is particularly located in a resource tree. And this could be in a set of nested dictionary-like objects. And essentially done in each segment of the path portion of the URL to be able to navigate through the resource tree. So it's essentially I'm not going to talk about these resources too much in detail because I believe that there are all the documentation already online as well. I just want to briefly touch on that because I do believe that it's very necessary for anyone who is either starting off in Pyramid or have not or already familiar with Pyramid but not have utilized them to the best of their ability just yet. So they both allow for extensibility of sites, since, as you know, we can definitely build on that, and because we can definitely organize our data based on that and really develop better develop better scenarios, develop better ordering through utilizing these particular tools as part of our toolkit as well, to be able to route our URLs easier and to be able to essentially traverse through the resources that put through the website in an easier way as well. Managing view configurations. And this particular topic is also very important, as we are also able to, Pyramid also allows us to be able to particularly create configurations based on views as well. So in this particular case instance, we can see some get post delete methods. And essentially, I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but I just want to mention first that essentially this creates static behavior from decorators, essentially. And essentially, it helps us to also not change the view input or output as well due to this. So essentially, we can create our view configurations based on this kind of behavior, essentially put decorators based on that. And this is all activated with scan. And once we do that, we're flexible to modify what is already put down once we create view configurations. We can modify them to be able to include new content or really be able to essentially tweak according to what our services currently require. And of course, once we do this, it's we can always use renderers for testing to be able to ensure that our particular view configurations work as necessary. And of course, we have to render it first. Now, one thing that I mentioned before as well was to be able to use declarative programming, and particularly in this case, it's declarative configuration. We wanted to be able to sometimes declare to a particular state of a system. And let's just say in this example, EC2 VPC. So one thing I mentioned before was that EC2 VPCs, EC2 in particular, is a widely changing state due to the fact that sometimes it takes a while to update. But essentially, we were able to use EC2 VPCs to be able to actually experiment as well with, through our declarative configuration. We are able to compare one desired state with a present state through this particular system as well. And essentially, we're able to utilize this to be able to build, for example, say, different environments as well. Say we provision some VPCs for a particular production environment, say another one for testing, a development environment. So it really is all about being able to deploy these kinds of configurations and based on those, and we can compare states as well based on those. And a bit more about managing view configurations. We're able to cache view configurations essentially, and we can utilize that by doing add view config. And with that, we're able to add control for cache and expiry header for responses as well through utilizing view config. And through that, we're able to essentially work with predicates as well. So when we work with predicates, we're able to ensure for better routing with better putting in more when we provide more coherent and relevant predicates, because the more relevant they are, the more easier it is to route easily, essentially. And so as an example of that is being able to put a request method as post. So essentially that's how we would go about using predicates. But essentially using predicates is always very good when we work with view configurations, just in order for us to be able to route things easier and to be able to build on them. And of course, we could also be dealing with global configurations as well to be able to generate information on every view that shares particular state configuration. And also initialize the view as a method as well as always necessary at some points, and always an option. So essentially, we're also able to use methods as a particular dictionary with same values as when we talk about the configurations as well. And when we do these kinds of planning, we also always have to plan for extensibility, as I mentioned before. And when we talk about this, we always have to consider a few considerations, namely, first thing, what project are you working on? So it always depends, again, as I mentioned before, on the type of project you're working on. And you definitely will be able to build on this depending on what you're going with, what are your objectives, and essentially, what do you plan to achieve with the time frame, and what skills do you currently have? So it all depends on those stuff. And also, I just want to make a special mention of tweets as well. Essentially, it's tweets, especially particularly just a code that essentially sits between a pyramid's router's main request handling function and the upstream WSGI. component which Pyramid uses as part of its app. So essentially, it's a feature that's provided by a lot of framework extensions as well. It's used by a lot of framework extensions as well. Essentially, it helps us to be able to examine exceptions essentially before they're returned to the WSGI application as well. So essentially, it helps us to be able to really be able to handle these kinds of requests as well through especially when we also consider the case areas of whether we get an error or whether or not, and essentially being able to route these as necessary as well when we go about that. And we can utilize this as part of our extensibility as well when we go about our whole planning for the whole extensibility of the application. Also, of course, asset specifications, always considering what particular specifications you'll require for the particular assets that you'll be working on, essentially, so that you'll be able to always be on track with everything that you currently have, and always check basically what's coming up next and what you currently require for your particular assets, and always plan for each asset as well as to how you're including them on the website and what can you eventually plan to build on them. And of course, aside from that, conflict detection is always very important. Always plan for conflict detection as well, especially in terms of when you work with repositories and such. Always need to be able to consider that. And of course, also adding directives is always a big part of extensibility. And when we execute extensibility, we always need to be able to provide coherent and necessary code for that. And it's just an example. So as you can see, we just provide a particular scan for looking for, in this particular case scenario, code called summoner package. And after that, we just commit the particular config. And after that, we just add the view. And in this particular case example, we may have the name as my view, and we may have the particular view as my package views on my views. Just an example of sample code of really how you go about executing for extensibility and really adding a particular view towards the whole list. So this one of the main things that makes like Pyramid so appealing to a lot of people, that you can just build on it just in a few lines of code and really add on things easily like this. And that's one of the reasons why I particularly still use it as well compared to other languages as well. I do particularly use other frameworks as well, but I just believe that Pyramid is really good just for this as well. Now, let's move on to the deeper part of this. So just particularly I'm going to talk about my case study now. So essentially, how did I make Pyramid work in my case? So in this particular case, I use Pyramid for also documentation building on a cloud-based project, essentially because of its also documentation-based capabilities, and also because we can monitor website activity through that is gained through garner learned data, and also to be able to provide better feedback to people within the company. And essentially, when I say about monitoring website activity and providing better feedback, these are things that are also done alongside the cloud as well, because Pyramid are also done can utilize when we deploy it on a cloud platform. We can utilize all the features of the platform as well, and namely stuff such as analytics that can be gained from AWS or from Azure, for example, if you also use Azure. And really, we're able to utilize this to be able to analyze performances and really be able to benchmark different particular tools that are used as well, and to see how far we have really gone through them. Are we gathering data at the right rate? And how is the traffic currently done in the cloud compared to when we had it, say, in offline premises, or when we just had a simple website? So essentially, through this, we're able to also provide better feedback to people in the company, because we're able to gather data and generate proper analytics from them. And this is a particular continuing of the case study. So interesting example, just for example, using a Pyramid pastor to be able to import stuff such as GitLab and set up logging. So in this particular example, we are able to also utilize logging from Pyramid itself to also utilize within the application, and just a few stuff as well, such as declaring a particular AD path for it to get through, and also from there setting up the logging lists that are required to be able to take up the rest necessary parameters and things that we're interested in to be able to be logged, and also essentially running the application as well that way. And of course, as part of it, we're able to then build upon this by running necessary testing, running necessary tools that are run alongside this, and this can all be organized alongside AWS as well as other cloud platforms that may be necessary alongside this. And just an example of how we would monitor deployment on the cloud. This particular case of, for example, having network packets, for example, measured. And this is an example analytics chart, that graph that we may obtain from, say, either AWS or Azure. Really, all of them really provide better feedback as well through this particular method. And as I mentioned before, a couple of slides as well, one of our main objectives really from using Pyramid is that, particularly myself, that I want to be able to utilize it to be also show people that it essentially does work as also a point of feedback as well. So it doesn't have to always be from a cloud, because we can gather documentation, set up documentation from Pyramid itself through setting up logging. So essentially, that's what I want to do as well, to be able to garner that particular data and generate the feedback to be able to also measure as well on how effective it is compared to other frameworks as well, and to also test out its limits, especially since I see that community is always active in these kinds of stuff, and also continuously participating in this kind of stuff. And it's always also important to choose the appropriate design patterns, especially when we're developing on a cloud. And two things that I just want to mention, because I believe that are so important to Pyramid, are dependency injection, which is essentially injecting based on a DI library, which is also from Pyramid itself as well already as a library, and also the factory pattern to be able to create objects for Pyramid. But in a particular example, I just want to mention dependency injection particularly, because I believe it's also very important for Pyramid. So in this particular example, we're importing stuff such as service and request scope-based service out of wired, and essentially we're then able to also say have a class for, say, another service, for example, to be able to take request scope-based services as an argument, and essentially take dependency to be able to and eventually also return based on dependency, so that we're able to conduct dependency injection essentially from that case scenario. So this is one case example, and this is just a very general example. You may also find similar examples such as this on the internet as well, because it's just a very generic example. But essentially, I just want to show how we're able to utilize this particular template to be able to perform dependency injection on your more relevant particular case-to-case based needs, because I believe that it's very easily adapted to any particular need necessary when we particularly perform DI, particularly with Pyramid. So some mistakes to avoid with Pyramid are that, firstly, it is definitely not the only documentation tool you'll need when you go about it, because it does provide logging, but it definitely is not the only documentation tool you'll need. You'll definitely need other resources as well, such as from, if you're deploying on the cloud, say, because we're talking about cloud after all in this talk, definitely utilize AWS's logging tools such as a CloudTrail and many more, and really setting if you have other third-party tool logging service as well for documentation, or other document tools as in general as well, definitely use those along the way as well. And do not over rely on Pyramid, because Pyramid is, I believe, it's great as standalone, but I believe that it's even better when it's built for hybrid, in the case that it works with other services as well, alongside other services as well. And we want to be able to also not sometimes it's also important to also not employ the scaffolding too early on. We want to be able to explore capabilities of pyramid first and really not go straight into it and just say like, oh, I just want to do some scaffolding. It's definitely, we need to prepare, do some research first on like what we currently need. And of course, but essentially, and one of the important things as well is that you should always plan ahead of time on design of how you'll eventually fit pyramid in. So always plan ahead of time on how you want to put pyramid in the application, because especially with coupled with scaffolding, which you always have to be able to do early on in the planning on, always be able to really fit pyramid in through essentially to be able to do this, you need to be able to always plan ahead and really see the particular points of time, like where would I need this? Which tools would I need to be able to perform this well? And with scaffolding, plan the layout well, and you'll be able to also get through the whole progress well. And just some more mistakes that I also see in the community still. It won't. Sometimes people say also it won't work just because there's too few or too many rails. Essentially, in this particular case example, really, we really just we really have to be able to prevent this particular case scenario of like having too many rails and find a particular right number for particular that. And also features are particularly there also if you want them, you don't have to use them. And particularly, like I mentioned before, features that highlights this URL dispatch and others ones as well. They are all definitely there for ease of convenience, but you don't mean, it doesn't mean that you have to use them, because essentially they are all there for just for you to be able to utilize them when necessary. You don't have to be able to use them all the time. And of course, do not forget your audience. Always, always, always consider what your audience currently needs. And especially, I cannot emphasize that enough, because definitely Pyramid is a great tool and all, and cloud platform as well. But you also have to consider who you're building it for. Does your company, does their particular clients require a particular cloud architecture? Do they prefer a particular architecture? Or are you familiar with Pyramid? Do you need to get them used to Pyramid first before continuing out the project? So that all has to be considered as well. So what is Pyramid's current position with the devs? And yes, I did mention it was underrated. It's definitely still alive. It's though I do believe that it's lacking mainstream support from a lot of devs. So that's just my own opinion, though. You could disagree on me with that, but essentially that's what I see from the community. I do believe that we definitely should have more support for Pyramid, essentially, and I believe and that's why I'm doing this talk as well, to be able to get more people more familiar with Pyramid, and also be able to really get more people more understanding about the whole concept of Pyramid and how it can be used in many case scenarios. And of course, particularly a lot of the misconceptions and why it wasn't widely adopted, I believe, is due to mistakes made early on in Pyramid's development. Because there are a lot of misconceptions that are made early on, and some people, I've seen some people debating in forums on the internet, saying that, oh yes, because well, let's say like Web2 can do this, and Pyramid, it just doesn't seem that flexible or something like that. And I do believe that some of the points do make sense, but I believe that it's important to, instead of focusing on negative support, to just see which what you can take from each particular framework, and particularly in Pyramid, I believe that I've highlighted a lot of them as well, especially in regards to being able to initialize configurations, in regards to being able to organize URLs better, and really able to, such as from URL dispatch. And I believe that with that, I just barely touched the surface. There are definitely a lot more, and I encourage you to be able to explore them as well in more detail, to be able to learn more about them. And I believe it's still a good opportunity to adopt it, because I believe that well, there are a lot of people that are adopted, but that there's still much potential for adoption within the community for a Pyramid in general. So I believe that definitely is necessary thing that we need to look into. And I believe that it'll continue on over the next time, following even years, maybe. And feature pyramid, essentially, we have continued. We're definitely going to have still continuous updates on how it's going to go. It's still going to be used in big industry projects, I'm sure, because I believe that it's already used, definitely used in some as well. And it's definitely going to be an asset to complement other upcoming assets. Like I believe, like I said, I believe that pyramid is meant to be built with other assets as well. I say pyramid is great doesn't mean it has to be built alone. And doesn't mean that everything has to be based on pyramid. It can be based on something else as well. It just serves as a tool and a framework for you to build on. And what do we get out of it in general? We got better client feedback from it, as I mentioned before, from what we have already obtained, from the data, from the analytics, and many more. Better understanding. We understand our data more. We understand our clients more. We understand how we're dealing with pyramid more, and we understand the benefits more as well. And we can also gauge its usefulness compared to other frameworks as well in Python. And of course, better standards as well, because through setting this particular documentation, setting this particular framework as a standard, we are able to also create better standards as well, rather than just going on without it. And to wrap up, 6 points, as I just want to mention, it's simple. We can simply just implement it, just as I mentioned before, and there is such a good community behind this. I believe that it's definitely easy to get into and definitely easy to ask opinions on. User devs will appreciate as well the simplicity of the design as well, especially since it really emphasizes a lot of libraries. It has libraries as well, a lot of things, including dependency injection, especially for URL dispatch, and just many more. It's just so good to be able to utilize with the community. And also, it really helps to be able to build on the usability of your apps. So it really helps a lot in that area as well. And you're able to find the right tools. Finding the right tools also requires you to experiment with what you have as well. It doesn't, you can't just go, you can't just finish off one with like just one tool and just be done with it. You definitely have to experiment over and over again, see which set of tools work alongside this. Because in my careers as well, it took a while as well to see which works with what, especially with pyramid. And of course, also feedback is necessary to the whole process for client satisfaction or customer satisfaction. And of course, sustain a community as well and give back alongside the learning as well, because I believe that pyramid has such a diverse community, especially compared to other languages as well, compared to other frameworks as well. And I think there's just so much potential in the community to be able to give back and essentially provide learning to other people as well. And it's a give back. It's a typical programming culture. You learn some, you give back some, because well, that's all our part of our journey, a learning process, right? So I believe it's all fair that way. And I'll wrap up there. So thanks. And I also include my socials there as well, too, if you're interested in asking questions after the conference. But now I'll be happy to take any questions.